We're talking again about why study history. So a lot of people think history is just a study of dates, you see, and reading information of things that happened in the past. That is certainly not the case. History in the human mind is always present. The past is always present. Things that happen to you at 1 year old, 2 year old, when you were 3 years old, are operating in you right at this moment. And the way you react to other people, the kind of taste you have, the desires you have, the kind of love relations you seek, and all of those kind of things are to a great extent determined by your experience before you were 3 or 4 years old. In other words, that experience, those experiences between birth and actually even in the womb itself, but between birth, 2 and 3 and 4 years old, operate right now to color your perception of other people, of yourself, to determine to a good degree the nature of your interaction with other people. In other words, then, the past is not something that's dead and gone and dropped off in your mind. It operates right here at this very moment, this very second, and it will operate until the day you die. And it's the same thing occurs in the history of a race. If you look at the history of a race, the way you look at an individual, those experiences that happened to us 200 and 300 years ago are not dead and gone by a long shot. The ways we relate to other people, many of our political goals today, many of our social goals right now, many of the things that we desire to achieve as a people come from our experience during slavery. Many of us are sitting here right now wanting to assimilate with white folk, wanting to be one. Many of us are struggling with feelings of inferiority and all of those kinds of things. Where did you think that started? Did I think it started here today? It started as soon as we hit the shores of this country. And so the experience of ourselves as a group is alive in us. Where else can history be alive but in the minds of people? If people were not in existence, what would be the point? We wouldn't even have to be discussing history. Another indication of the importance of history, of course, is the fact that those who rule over us and those who dominate us have worked very hard at distorting our history and at hiding our history from us and at falsifying our history. So if history were not that important to everyday life, to real life, and to concrete activities, why then has this nation and the people who rule it worked so hard to destroy African history? Why are they resisting the inclusion of African history and African culture in the educational structure if they think that inclusion is purely harmless from their point of view, you see? In other words, then, we need to gain a new appreciation of history and need to recognize that history is always present. And that to a good extent, if we are to change our present behavior, and if we are to change the future, then we must change the past and change our relationship to it. And therefore, the falsification of and mislabeling of black consciousness deals with why we should study history. It deals with history as mythology. And you can recognize in your everyday behavior, if you've been given the wrong history about a person, how that can change your behavior toward that person. Or if people have a wrong history about you, they've been given the wrong information about you. People interact with other people based on their history of the other person, you see. If people want to change the nature of people's relationships, they will often falsify the history of one or both of those persons, knowing that one or both of those persons are going to interact with each other differently depending on their history or their sense of the history of the individual. This goes on with groups, ladies and gentlemen. That's why those in power then, you see, rewrite history. Because in rewriting history, they rewrite the person's perception of himself, whose history they've rewritten. They also then change that person's behavior and relationships with other people, given the history that they've come to believe. And they also change the way other people interact with those people, you see, based on the history that they've learned about the people. You see, that's why any group has to take command of its history and to make sure that it projects the kind of history that operates in its best interest. It cannot let another people write its history and let another people, you see, determine the nature of its history. And it must also know the history of other people as well, if it is to maintain self-control and self-determination, you see. But history is not a mere remembrance of experience. Everything we've learned in the past. You know, if you learn to talk, you learn to walk, and any other thing, you learned it when? Not today, you learned it years ago. So if you, in a truly theoretical sense, forgot all of your history and all of your experience, you would return then to a fetal state of existence, to a state of immaturity. You would be reduced in your capacity to deal with current and present realities. Many of the coping techniques and things that you've learned in your past would not be useful to you because you would not have them at hand. The same thing is true then in the life of a people. We learned a lot of things as African people. We learned to cope with a lot of things. We learned a lot of methods and techniques for solving problems.
The study of history cannot be a mere celebration of those who struggled on our behalf. We must be instructed by history and should transform history into concrete reality, into planning and development, into the construction of power and the ability to ensure our survival as a people. If not, Black History Month becomes an exercise in the inflation of egos. It becomes an exercise that cuts us further off from reality. Ironically, we now see even other people who are not our friends joining us in this celebration, which means they must see it in some means of protecting their own interests and see it in something that works for them and possibly against us. If they can celebrate our history and see it as something positive, then it means that we're not using it in a revolutionary sense. They do not see our study of it as a threat to their power. If we're not studying it in a way that is a threat to their power, then we are studying it incorrectly, and our celebration of it is helping to maintain us in a state of deception. So let us make sure that we look at and study history in a light such that it advises our interests, not inflates our egos and blinds us to reality. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, continuing my reading of Dr. Amos Wilson's The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric History, Psychiatry, and Politics of White Supremacy. And today we're covering why study our history. What is it about our history that is important, so important that the white supremacists will go far, far, far and wide, over and beyond, to hide or distort or change or manipulate our history? Why do they care more about hiding our history than we do about learning our history? And when we do learn our history, why does it seem like the end goal is to only just know history, to brag and say you know it, rather than to understand it and use it. Because there's a good number of Black people in America who know our history, but we've yet to see how they can utilize the information that they have to create something tangible for themselves or their community. And that is a failure in the teaching or even the utilization of the information. That's on all of our parts across the board. We've always been taught about history, and we've always utilized history as just information to know and information to have, rather empowering information that we can wrap around other things that we know and do to create something tangible, right? Because it is on us to be creative enough to utilize the information that we have to create something that is tangible for ourselves and something that is tangible for others, i.e. something like this, right? But that is the proper utilization of history. History has to become a tool rather than just a collectible. Once again, history has to be a tool rather than a collectible. As Dr. Wilson has stated various times, the education you receive should help to solve your problems. And if the education that you're receiving isn't helping to solve your problems, then you have been improperly educated. So that is true for us, even in the sense of us who have spent years and decades studying the history, but not knowing how, or not even being willing to use the information in a productive fashion, rather than a collective fashion, rather meaning you collect the information just to say you have it, and you talk about the information that you have, and you might stroke your ego every now and then. We've been there. I've been there until I learned more. And what I learned is, okay, we got to do something with this information. So that's like one of the overall arcing things of this video today is why I study history, but looking at the mechanics of history and the importance of history and how history is used from the standpoint of the oppressor and the oppressed, but also how we can use this history. So we're reading from pages 13 to 22. We're picking back up at the bottom of page 14, the socio-political role of historiography. When we have an issue, we have an issue here that I call the projection and image of history. History has been downplayed in this society. History has a poor reputation. Often it is looked upon by too many people as essentially a set of dates and events. People ask, why should I study these dates? Why should I study these events? What does it have to do with today? It is as if they say, okay, it may be used to explain how some things came about in today's world, but probably we could live without it. Often, history among even many of our people, even so-called Black history itself, has been looked upon as irrelevant and unprofitable. The idea is, why study Black history? It's not going to make me money. It's not going to get me a job. What can I do with it? You should get yourself a degree in computer science, get yourself a trade. I'm not interested in Black power. I'm interested in green power. These statements express foolish concepts. When we hear them, we recognize that the individual has not seen the connection between history, power, and money. There's a direct connection between history and economics. Those who know their history, understand their history, and utilize the lessons that they've learned from history have power, economics, resources, and land. There's a reason you take a person's or people's history away from them when you want to conquer them, or when you have conquered them. You want them to assimilate into your history and your culture. Forget who they are, because that could be a puzzle piece to empower them. You should not know who you are. Your great, 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 great grandsons will not know who you are. That's the oppressive mindset. So the mindset of the oppressed should be to do any and everything possible to make sure that we pass down our history, to make sure that the ones who come behind us know their history and understand. Look at the economic state of the African diaspora versus the economic state of the European diaspora, the Asian diaspora, the Hispanic diaspora, the Arab diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, just looking at the different groups of people, right? People who know who they are, people who know their history as much as possible, way more than we do. So history is important. History is profitable. History is tangible if used properly. History can be a tool, a mighty tool if wielded properly. All right. I often say this in regard that if there were not direct relationship between history and money, a direct relationship between history and power, history and rulership, history and domination, then why is it that the European rewrite history? Why is it that the European wants to take our history away from us? Why is it that the European wants to rewrite our history and distort it? Why is it that he doesn't want to present it at all? Apparently, the rewriting, the distortion, and the stealing of our history must serve vital economic, political, and social functions for the European, or else he would not bother to try so hard to keep our history away from us and to distort it in our own minds. Let us meditate on these issues, and I will come to and I would think we'll come to realize that there is a direct relationship between history and economics, political and social development.